today, I thought I'd take you through a little walk that I decided to do here in Connecticut. The park is known as Bluff Point State Park, and I'm a little over a mile. I'll put the little trail there so you can see where I'm at. It's an interesting little beach. At the beginning of the beach, about a half mile back, there's like tons and tons of little shells. Like literally the entire beach is just nothing but shells. It's like 100% shells. I've never seen that. But that's one of the cool things about going for little walks. You know, you get to discover all of these other unique places. As a matter of fact, we're only a few miles away from the city of Lyme, Connecticut, where Lyme disease was first discovered. I know that there is an entire conspiracy theory swirling around, and I've read a bit about it. I don't know what to think. At first, I am very resistant to accepting conspiracy theories, so I'm still skeptical. But the case that has been presented seems quite compelling. But well, the thing about conspiracies is sometimes they can be true. You know, I mean, there's the conspiracy folks, their favorite example is MK Ultra. And that was one that people thought was a conspiracy, and the government was, oh, you guys are all just dreaming it. And it turned out to be true. The thing is that it's the same thing as, for example, if somebody has a bias. You know, there was a study of granola bars. And if the granola bar study is funded by, the granola companies, well, guess what? It is true. They could, and the study's like, oh, well, granola is very healthy. And sure, you could say, well, yeah, but they are biased. They have a vested interest in highlighting that, in focusing on that. That's a bias. It's not necessarily wrong, but it is a very good idea to be skeptical. You know, before long COVID, Lyme disease really destroyed people's lives. I mean, I'm not under saying it when I say that it fucked them up, because they actually, the worst part of it is it was a kind of myalgia. And myalgias in our country, where everybody is overworked, that's just absolutely insane, because nobody ever listens to you when you have myalgias. That's exactly what happened with what we used to call fibromyalgia. I don't know if I think they probably changed its name precisely because the name fibromyalgia acquired a bad reputation. In part, it was women, because mostly women, and women in their 30s usually suffered from it. And one of the things good, because I've actually known a couple of people who had it, the other things that actually made it worse was often these were very hardworking women, and their own work ethic worked against them. Because at any other time they would have been like, who the hell is gold bricking so much? Why are you so lazy? I'm oversimplifying, but a couple of the folks. So what I'm saying is sometimes these very people were hard on themselves. They thought they were being lazy. It's like, why can't I get out of bed? Oh, why can't I get out of bed? Am I just such a freaking fuck up? And as I say, these were women who, by their own nature, were already very hardworking. That belief that, oh, this can't be an illness, this must be, I'm just being lazy, they didn't forgive themselves, many of them. Of course, the world along with them. So it was kind of like a 1-2 punch. The women self-hated for what they felt, and the world thought that they were just lazy hypochondriacs. They were just being lazy. Oh, your muscle aches and pains and your laziness. You're just being a bum. Which, think 20 years back, they were the jokes. In And it's only recently that now we start to think about how, no, there's something that was serious there, and many now regret having given these people such a hard time. Their lives destroyed. Oh, why would I be skeptical of groups of people who are conspiracists? Well, that could be a long discussion too. The problem is that they're far less likely to question their own position and to reconsider it in light of conflicting evidence. So, for example, the easiest ones to knock down, but this applies to almost all conspiracies, flat earthers. If you speak with a flat earther, you're going to notice that that almost all of them acquired their understanding through belonging to groups, whether it is physically belonging or simply identifying with certain groups and certain beliefs. And this need to explain perception, and this is very important, this need to explain perception. You know, if we look at the world above, we look at the moon above, and it's like, well, it seems to be going around us. The sun seems to be going around, and the earth, look, we can look very far away. It seems to be pretty flat. You can see the boat all the way out there. Of course, you can't explain why I can't see boats all the way in China. Oh, well, you can't see far enough. Well, yeah, I can get a telescope. I still won't see them. But that, as a matter of fact, that's the whole thing. Is in science today, 150 years ago, it was a little different, but today, science has gone far beyond our perceptions. We can no longer rely on our perceptions. I mean, quantum mechanics is the fundamental example of how our perceptions are absolutely worthless with modern science. The flat Earth, yeah, the world feels kind of flat when you're walking on it, but once you actually do your own individual calculation, you actually look, you walk, and you measure time. You do a little bit of mathematics, simple mathematics. You set aside your own perception, and you arrive at the very conclusion that 2,500 years ago had already been established. Now, important thing, what was his name? But the guy who measured the Eratosthenes, so I'm going completely from memory. I think it was Eratosthenes. But you know, when he measured, he actually was off slightly. He wasn't actually as accurate as people think he was. He was kind of lucky. A lot of research, by the way, is benefited by that. But anyway, but the research was later supported by falsification, by other lines of evidence that attempted to falsify it. You can make predictions and you can produce new knowledge. This is a very important aspect of science that conspiracists cannot do. Conspiracy theorists pretend something, they fill in the gaps in certain areas of our ignorance, and then they just say, well, there, behind, on the other side of that gap must exist X. There, you know, here there be dragons. And the scientific person would be like, well, no, we have to go over there and look. You know, you have anti-vaxxers, it'll be like, oh, well, look at that's another example. You know, gross exaggeration and an absolute failure to understand statistics. Anti-vaxxers will be, well, haven't you heard about all the cardiac problems, myocarditis? Okay, pericarditis and myocarditis. So they're like, yeah, but you know, there's kids dropping dead from myocarditis all of us ever since the. And then you ask them simple questions. Okay, what are these statistics? Oh, well, anyone can lie with statistics. No. Before you actually malign statistics, tell me the statistics, the actual counts. Let's look at the counts. And then they'll hem and haw, but eventually, if the few who actually honestly, because there are some conspiracists who are kind of blurry, they actually do kind of want to apply science to it. And those are I actually respect them, because they'll be like, okay, let's look at the numbers. And then suddenly you'll realize, well, hey, so out of 10,000 under 18s, you'll have that, just to give you a round number, this is not the actual number, but let's just say out of 10,000 people, there's 10 people. So 1 in 1,000 gets myocarditis. Oh, okay. Well, now we have a number to go on. We can do samples all over the world, because there's plenty of this data. If you go look for it, there's plenty of data. You know, simply dismissing it is another sign of, let's at least look at it. Let's see what the data does before we start dismissing all of it wholesale. So let's look at the data. And the data says, oh, well, 1 in 10,000. Okay, well, let's go look at France's data. 1 in 10,000. Let's go look at Sweden's data. 2 in 10,000. A little higher, but okay. Let's go look at Saudi Arabia. You know, 1.5 in 10,000. And they're all roughly about the same, about 1 in 10,000. Okay, good. And each one of those, you can start to look. Okay, what about this population? What is their rate? 1 in 10,000. What about the people who got COVID? What is their rate? 5 in 10,000. A lot higher. What about people who got the vaccine? 1.5 in 10,000. What about people who got the vaccine and got COVID? 4 in 10,000. All of a sudden, you start to see slight trends.
Lap 3, 25. Heart rate 83.
There's something going on
Average
here.
pace 21:33.
So we look at the statistics. The thing is, notice everything I'm saying here is boring. It's boring. It requires discipline, and it's gonna make your head dizzy. And conspiracy theorists, this is the thing. They don't want that. They want nice, clean, crisp answers. They do not like ambiguity. They cannot deal with something where there is no answer, as a matter of fact. That's the one thing that drives them the craziest. Whereas, like, there's no answer. My whole point, though, is with people who are now looking at the COVID vaccine, the risk, properly statistically measured, the risk of actual negative consequences. First of all, myocarditis, I will be the first to tell you that anything that strikes the heart sounds scary. For much of my life, before I even started running, my fear was heart attacks. I'm old. Back when I was a kid, I still remember that I guess I was terrified. When I'd go to the library, the teachers, the librarians would put up these public health videos that talked about, back then, the scourge of heart attacks. And when I started running, I was always told that if you run too fast and your heart rate goes too high, your heart could stop. You could die of a heart attack from just running too fast. And I believed it. And a lot of my early runs, I would be afraid that I might die during a run. I say all of this to show you that I feel it in my heart to know what it's like to be afraid of dying of heart problems. So I don't simply dismiss the myocarditis. But just like what I did with running, I started to do the research. And I learned that in running, yes, because running stresses your heart. If you have a heart condition, you might exacerbate it. You might even die. But on balance, even people with heart problems should run, because the vast majority of people, if you do nothing else, now we know more, but if you knew nothing else, just going for nice, easy runs is far more likely to benefit your heart than it is to injure it. Far more likely. And I say that now as somebody whose resting heart rate is in the low 40s. Never was that low. And yes, that's a very healthy heart rate for somebody who does not use drugs to do that. Very healthy. It's enviable. Again, for somebody who does not use drugs to get there, it is an amazing heart rate to have. It is one of my bragging points. And part of that had to do with the fact that I had to overcome my own initial fear I had to overcome my fear of dying of a heart attack and listen to the science. And when I learned the science said, run all the time. Run as much as you can, because you're far more likely to help yourself. Sometimes I still occasionally will watch the news of people who die during marathons. And it still terrifies me. That feeling's never going to go away. But then I look at the actual statistics, the science, the number of people. Again, I do a statistical analysis. Oh, well, how many people were at the race? Oh, well, 25,000. And how many died? 1. Okay, well, in any population in general, 1 out of 25,000 is actually not that bad of a statistic. Just statistically speaking, amongst 25,000 people, in any given day, you will probably have 1 person die. That's just absolutely normal. So that's my whole thing that I was also saying with the whole thing with myocarditis. Okay, so if our normal rate is 1 in 10,000, COVID brings it up to 1.5 in 10,000. Myocarditis, by the way. We haven't even talked about death. So once we look at that, but then we look at it that it's for young people, and we suddenly learn that like almost all young people will completely recover from myocarditis. Here we go. Again, we start to look at the analysis and everything starts to go back to, you know what, this isn't as bad as people want it, as their emotions tell them. And just like me with running, it's like you should start to listen to the science, the actual rational analysis, not what you feel. My feelings will never go away. From my fear of dying of a heart attack will never go away. But I can overcome it with scientific analysis. There are people who also probably feel a great fear of myocarditis and other heart problems from vaccines. Yeah. But if you actually look at the science, you take the time and analyze it, you can do like I said, you can measure the benefits and the costs, the risks and benefits. Well, what is the risk? Well, the risk is myocarditis. But given that most people who are under 18 are very likely to recover, like the recovery rate is almost 100%. Do some people die? Yes. But remember what I just said about running marathons. Is the rate of death greater than the background? The problem is that many of these people who are very biased will absolutely ignore one of those important factors that normalizes everything. They'll be like, oh, well, look, there were 3 people who died out of 30,000. Nothing unusual. Don't do that. See all the shells? Pretty cool, huh? One thing that I wanted to do while I was talking about all of that was to at least try to be fair to all groups of people, because I didn't actually want to separate the conspiracists as particularly dumb, because they are not.
Lap 5, 22:34. Heart rate 87. Average pace 23:50.
There you go. 5 miles. And I also do it because I also want to know, well, maybe there are things that many other of us who don't consider ourselves conspiracists, maybe because we lump them apart, we think that we are so much more rational, or at least like we like to say, oh, well, I'm more rational in most things. Maybe I'm not in everything. Well, yeah, but still, I'd like to know where I am irrational too. And we all are. I've explained some of my irrationalities. Like I said, my irrational fear of getting a heart attack, and how I've spent decades researching, in part to calm my fear of dying of a heart attack. Does that make me fully realize? Hell no. There's an endless stream of irrationalities that we as humans have. And you know what? You want to know what's even more ironic? Is a lot of our irrationality isn't all that irrational. It's just not properly framed. And this is something where my research into consciousness and evolutionary psychology has come to an interesting point where many of our behaviors, sometimes we're like, oh, why do I do this? Why do I do that? There are behaviors that I have that sometimes surprise me and sadden me. Sometimes I will behave negatively towards certain things or certain people. I'm like, why do I do that? I know rationally that that's wrong, yet I feel this. And for much of my life, I would be like, well, try to explain it like with psychology. Oh, well, your parents didn't treat you right and this and that and the other. Or this person, you were hurt by this kind of a person. And so now you are angry at those people. And all of these things can sometimes make some sense. I wouldn't say they don't. But I've also come to see that, and I say this because, again, I've solved some of my own psychological problems by sometimes looking at it and saying, you know what, maybe. But sometimes our behaviors are simpler than that. Sometimes, at least in this limited aspect, we're not as complex as we think we are. We have behaviors that are coded into us. And I've always said that one of the things that I can't stand that really just gets my goat is if people laugh at me. And if they look at me and laugh, I feel an insult. I feel insulted. And sometimes I'll get pretty upset. Whereas I have a nephew who, if people laugh at him, he does something dumb, even if he trips. To him, it's funny. He feels like he's entertaining people, and he starts to laugh with them. And I've always said these are little behavior patterns that we just kind of were born with because he has family that behaves in the same way. And this is where you see these little behavior patterns that it's not necessarily that, like I said, somebody mistreated me. It's just that's the way I was born. He was born with this genetic behavior wired into him that's a little different, that I admire, by the way. I'd like to do that. If I trip right now and people laugh, most of the time they won't, but if they did, I'd like to be like my nephew and just like giggle it off. You live a happier life when you do that. And I am making the effort, but my whole point though is that these behaviors aren't necessarily as a result of, like I said, somebody mistreats you. As a matter of fact, there's behaviors that we have that can even make more sense from that light, from the light of just evolved behaviors. Many of our racist leanings, racism can be complex. So I'm not going to say it's a simple thing that reduces to single behaviors. But there is one aspect of racism that we can analyze as a naturally exploitative sense. We as humans will exploit others given the chance. And it's not just racism, sexism, prejudice against other people. For example, prejudice against very, very fat people. Prejudice against people with intellectual disabilities. Prejudice against gay and LGBT and trans people. Many of these things are not necessarily that we have, as I said, it's more complex than that, but at least one aspect of it, because you might be like, well, because I remember having heard, sometimes people are homophobic because they have latent homosexuality. Sometimes. And some of that may actually be. But there's also an aspect where if we see a group that is kind of like downtrodden, or if you see an opportunity to exploit an individual of a group in a way to lift yourself up, this is in a social species makes sense to exploit them, because technically you will elevate your own social position by demeaning the other person. I'm not saying this is justified. Oh, I thought I'd have a little seat here. I'm not saying this is justified or that it's good. I'm simply saying that it's something that makes some sense. Exploiting others for your own personal gain sometimes does make sense. Should we? No, of course we should not do it. But if we understand some of the simple mechanisms, we can sometimes fight those mechanisms We can challenge them. We can make peace with them, reconcile them, and not let them control us. Let me be clear. It's absolutely abhorrent to exploit other groups for your own personal gain. We should not. And as a society, we've actually come very far to where we don't do that anywhere near as much as we used to. Back in the past, it used to be far more acceptable to make fun of women, to make fun of gays, to make fun of trans, to make fun of other races. This is exactly why now that as we're becoming more and more inclusive, we look back at some old videos, some old movies, and we cringe. If not, we downright retch at how abominable we used to be. But then we look at that, and some of us may actually be insightful enough to be like, whoa, in 100 years, people are probably going to retch at stuff that we think is normal. Yes, they will. I've always admitted that I will probably be a beast when people consider how much meat I eat. I'm pretty sure that one day we will stop eating meat. I like to think of myself as Augustine St. Clair, I think is his name. Uncle Tom's Cabin. He was like a good slave owner. If I remember him, he was good and kind to his slaves, but he still understood his position in life. He was exploiting the system and he was benefiting from it. And he knew in a way he was a monster. He just didn't want to be as bad of a monster, so he tried not to be so terrible. And although true believers and vegans will dispute my contention, I think in some ways I feel that way. That in 150 years, once I'm long gone, there will be people who think that people like me were monsters. They're glad that they're not like me anymore. They're so much more inclusive. Okay, let's keep going. Well, I do hope that you take some of what I talk about here. Not just that, but walks. You and I, we all need to go on walks a little more often. We need to enjoy ourselves. Take a little time off. Work is essential because it is what provides for life. But too many people don't appreciate the value of rest. Rest is not being lazy, like I was saying. This is the problem that I was talking about with some people who were too hard on themselves with the myalgias. Rest is not a luxury. It is absolutely essential for everything. I, who work out like crazy, will tell you there are times that I too, and we all want to do that. We all want to get as little rest as possible because somehow we just think that, we just don't see the value in it. But no, whether it is you're resting between sets, when I'm working out, doing squats, and I need to take my little 3.5 minute rest, I need to take that rest. I cannot just screw around and cut my rest. That's I'm not going to recover. Or whether I need to take 2 or 3 days off between gyms, or whether I need to take a week off every few weeks, every 6 to 8 weeks. These rests are absolutely essential. They are not luxuries. And that's in my world. In your world where you work, they're absolutely essential too. So go. Take a little break, go for a little walk, discover the world. Enjoy what is not a luxury, it is absolutely essential. And other than that, I hope our little walk was at least a little entertaining. And until next time, don't forget to challenge yourselves.